Thank you for coming to a casual Wednesday afternoon conversation about nihilism. I'm sure everyone was very excited for that. My name is Joey Camire. I'm a principal and managing director at a company called SYLVAIN. We are a strategy and design consultancy focusing on brand, innovation, and organizational strategy and design. We're certified B Corp. We started the company about 13 or so years ago. We have offices in New York, LA, Amsterdam, and Richmond, Virginia. That was my spiel about trying to establish some form of credibility. And so let's get into the fun stuff. Stop me if you've already heard this before. There have been a series of articles, a wave of articles, written about a growing sentiment of discontent or malaise within the workforce, often couched in ideas like anti-ambition or anti-work. These articles paint a picture of a new generation of people who are either unwilling, unable, or incapable of entering the workforce. And the latest, trendiest version, most mimetically appealing version of this is this idea of quiet quitting. I'm sure we've all heard it ad infinitum. The way that people talk about it is employees completing the tasks in their job description, but not doing extra things that they won't get compensated for. Except this isn't really how we're using it, because we use it to suit so many different arguments. Right, we've heard just in the past year a number of different iterations of this same concept, right? We have the Great Resignation, the Great Reckoning, anti-work, anti-ambition, quiet quitting. We're filling out a bingo card. And the common refrain that we hear is that nobody wants to work anymore. We've heard it from business leaders, executives, HR, and more importantly, Kim Kardashian. So that's establishing that it's important and we should pay attention. But what's funny is this isn't actually a new phenomena, right? I pointed to some other articles. All of these news clippings espouse the exact same idea, except for they're pulled from over the last century, right? They're all saying this phrase, nobody wants to work anymore, all the way back to like 1908 and before. And the thing is, you know, we do have some signals, but it's important to try and determine whether we think these are actually true sentiments or whether they're just interesting stories or shifting the blame because they're sticky and interesting and sort of become self-perpetuating in the media. And so things like, you know, cultural anecdotes like the r/anti-work subreddit forum. We've seen an increase in conversations about this in TikTok and Instagram and Twitter. And if any of you have dipped your toe into the fishbowl, I'm sure that you have experienced some of this. But when we talk about this, we also see a lot of actual studies pointing to data suggesting that maybe this is real, that there is a shift in people's attitudes about things. Right, this one study points to 40% of people already considering the idea of leaving their gig. 40% is a pretty significant number in the total workforce, right? And when we talk about it, though many people are saying different things, this quote, these people are generally well-educated workers who are leaving their jobs, not because the pandemic created obstacles to their employment, but at least in part because it nudged them to rethink the role of work in their lives altogether. And while this may be true of knowledge workers, we're seeing it across a wide, across every segment of like demographic profiles, right? You see it across socioeconomic status, geography, sector. And so this idea isn't isolated to knowledge workers. So for the sake of this discussion, let's assume that this idea of anti-work and anti-ambition are real or indicative of some change in the sentiment in workforce, just for the sake of this discussion, that no one wants to work anymore. Then we should examine why exactly that might be. A lot of the literature points to this idea of feelings of futility in the face of change. If you go into the psychological literature, most psychologists would talk about this through the concept of learned helplessness. And there are a lot of reasons why we might see people feeling that way within broader society, right? We have people fighting back against the growing and self-perpetuating income inequality. We can see the rise of billionaires, the cost of housing and rent going up, or for the wonks, an increase in our Gini coefficient number. You can see it in people's relationship to productivity, right? There's a strong sense supported by a surfeit of data that work and productivity no longer produce the same kind of returns that it once did. Simply put, an hour of work is declining in value. We also see it in things like the climate crisis, right? Where people are feeling like all of the people in the seats of power are not acting out in ways that are addressing the problem. A problem that we're all increasing in sort of increasingly visible ways and yet struggle to change. Not to mention issues of systemic racism, gender discrimination, the impacts of or feeling like people are part of generally uncaring, unempathetic institutions, and of course, you know, the elephant in the room, a global pandemic that is isolating people from family, friends, extended community, disrupting our daily lives, impacting our health, and creating a massive sense of unpredictability. It's all sunshine. The issue with all of this, though, is it's affecting us, right? You know, when we look at this question of nihilism, all of these things are sort of presenting situations where we are feeling like we are insecure in the face of all of this change. And whether real or media created, this conversation about anti-work or anti-ambition are pointing at this larger issue, the rising threat of nihilism. And so if we look at nihilism, simply put, nihilism is the belief that nothing matters, that no individual action possesses any moral or ethical distinction between any other action in the same circumstance. And this idea that everything is meaningless can lead us to feel that each of our power, our ability to influence and impact change is irrelevant, that we're helpless to affect the world, that we should just give up. And there are signals of this as well, both culturally and anecdotally, in things like the growth of r/nihilism online, which has grown 400% from January 2019 to September 2022, which is especially interesting because it hadn't grown in that way at any time before that window and was started in 2008. And you hear these sort of phrases start to come up and bubble up around the internet, and maybe it's only for the extremely online, but phrases like après nous le déluge, apologies for my French accent, but this phrase means after us the flood. It was popularized by a woman named Madame de Pompadour, a mistress of Louis XV. And the phrase is sort of a nihilist exemplar. It's used to mean everything after our death doesn't matter, and so we should only focus on our immediate needs and our actions are unimportant. And you see this phrase and look to current day and you see all of these memes online and the increase of content oriented towards nihilism, and you realize that there's not a major distinction between these two things. But the question is, why should you care? Why should anyone care about this idea of a rising threat of nihilism? I think it's because we all know that nihilism is a dangerous thing, right? Ideas matter, ideas spread, and nihilism is dangerous. And that it isn't true, that there is legitimate ethical and moral implications to each of our individual actions. And if you lean all the way into this idea of nihilism, you start to run into problems, right? The classic trolley thought experiment. If you run over one person or if you run over 5 people, there's no difference. Outcomes don't matter. And yet, when we look at all of these problems that we're facing, right? Issues in work and equality and equity, when we're looking at the climate crisis, we know that outcomes matter to these solutions. If we care about them, right, people are screaming about these issues. These outcomes that we can create have a distinction in value, but if we're succumbing to this feeling of nihilism, we're going to reduce our ability to impact change. And the thing is, nihilism isn't sort of an inherently foregone conclusion. There are ways that we can begin to feel our own power, to work past this sense of learned helplessness and believe that not all outcomes are equal. This idea of after us, the flood, the effective altruism movement is one that is growing, and people like Kim Stanley Johnson and the effective altruism movement are pushing for us to consider up to 7 future generations when weighing our own decisions. We need to match our care about all of these problems with a sense of power in ourselves and in each other. So given that this is a professional conference, maybe we can narrow in the focus to work, where we're experiencing a more pointed type of nihilism that we might call 9-to-5 nihilism, feeling like our actions and our effort at work don't matter. And there are many legitimate reasons why people would feel this way. This idea of 9-to-5 nihilism is amplified by the degree of ambiguity in our future of work discussions, which I'm sure many of those things are happening here at this conference. Discussions about distributed work or asynchronous work, back to the office, first not, all of those things. There's this feeling that among workers that companies are either trying but struggling to modernize in the face of all of this change, or simply choosing to remain ignorant and do nothing about it. It's amplified by the feeling that while everyone is talking about quiet quitting, workers are wondering why the conversation isn't about employee well-being instead of portraying big companies as the victims to this sort of unrelenting, unforeseen boogeyman of employee demands. It's amplified by the fact that people are feeling burnt out. I'm sure anyone in this room, everyone in this room has experienced some form of burnout over the past 3 years. And while it's happening across all industries, it's particularly relevant to professional services and knowledge work. And with this level of ambiguity and chaos we've been seated in, it shouldn't come as a surprise then that nihilism is on the increase. It's because nihilism is an expectable outcome from not taking sustainable, systemic approaches to solving problems. It happens when people ultimately just feel like their job or the system isn't set up to create a social safety net. It's not there to create a sense of safety, support, and community for them. They feel alone. But progress in all of these areas that we're talking about, around inequality, around worker compensation, about any of the things that are important to you, require belief that your actions can have impact potential. The writer Alan Moore wrote, famously, there's not really anywhere to go after nihilism. It's not progressing towards anything. It's a statement of outrage, however brilliant. So nihilism is inherently something that impedes our ability to make change, to make things better. And yet, in pockets, people are starting to feel their own power, to leverage their power and experiment towards solutions that don't reject the morality or ethics of different outcomes. We've seen, because of this, the reality is we've already been seeing a lot of change happening in the way that we're thinking about the workplace. While this is one simple anecdote, the 4-day work week is a possible example that we can all look to where people are having non-zero-sum conversations about companies being able to accomplish what they want to accomplish and employees being able to reevaluate their relationship with work, with time, and create more space for themselves on the weekend. We're seeing unions across the country making strides to achieve more fair workplaces, better employee treatment, and better pay. And for the first time in decades, 30 to 40 years, we're seeing unions on the rise, from the Postal Service making big changes, Starbucks establishing a union, and wins with Amazon. And we're opening our minds to what can be what an inclusive workplace really looks like. Examples include things like actively investing in improved and more equitable hiring practices, hiring formerly incarcerated people, people turning to companies like the Mom Project to hire moms who are returning to work after having a child. All of those things seem like reasonable things that should have already been happening, but they weren't. And the fact of the matter is people started to do something about it and take action. And this isn't the only place that we're seeing it, right? Not just at work. The Rocky Mountain Institute just published a report last week that shows that we may be turning the corner on carbon reduction much faster than we had previously thought, being able to surpass our climate Paris Accord goals based on the decline in the cost of sustainable and renewable energy. All of these things are happening, and when we're caught in this feeling of nihilism, it can be hard to look at the things that are happening and continue to push them. Because the thing is, progress comes with time and continued effort, and often happens in really fast and punctuated ways that we weren't anticipating, where our energy over time is aggregating and then suddenly something happens. And as agencies and consultancies, with a lot of resources, with a lot of talent and brain power, we don't get a pass. We can't be bystanders in these conversations, both about work as well as sort of broader social and societal changes that need to happen. We're really well equipped to help tackle some of these major issues, but only if we each feel empowered to make a difference. This is actually our company's mission statement, and I put it up here not as a plug, but as a demonstration that I'm trying to also take, and our company is trying to take this thing to heart, right? The idea that we can use and leverage the might of corporations to make broader social changes empowers me every day when I'm going into a meeting or working with a new company or client to feel like I can do something, and for my team to feel empowered to do those things as well. Because the antidote to nihilism, there is an antidote to nihilism, right? One that all of us should be thinking about, which is creating a sense of internalized agency in ourselves, in the people around us, in the people that we touch. A sense that we all need to feel like our actions have power and influence and that they matter, and that outcomes aren't all equal. And this isn't enough to hear it from me or someone else. It's an idea and a feeling we have to actually feel and believe in ourselves. And so how do we create that? I have a few suggestions. I probably wouldn't be doing this talk if I didn't. This is not an exhaustive list. It is things that I've learned from researching these ideas and my own experience. But I'm very welcome at the end if there's a Q&A. If you have ideas you want to add to the mix, they're very welcome. So the first is this idea of finding your give a shit. Something that you care about that doesn't take convincing, right? If you're currently feeling any form of this sort of nihilism or simply a sense of apathy about the ways in which you can affect change at work, starting small can make a big difference. You need to find a thing that you care about that needs changing, right? That can be focusing on a person you know, a coworker, a customer, your team, a broken system, a broken window, a broken coffee machine. It doesn't matter. The idea is that you start somewhere and begin developing this relationship with your own power where your actions can do something. For me, this has always been about people, right? Teaching people, hiring people, helping people, building culture, whatever it is. Each time I do a small thing to help someone at our company, I feel that I can do the thing the next time it comes up. The next thing is about distributing power. And I know at a conference like this, there's a wide spectrum of people at different points in their career, right? Experiencing different levels of their own power. But it's extremely important to distribute your power. This can't be emphasized enough. Power is a non-zero-sum game, despite everything every management book or business book has told you over the years, right? I love this quote: the power a manager has in an organization grows with the power that others in the organization have, right? If we do the superhero example, Thor is not less powerful because the Hulk or Iron Man or whoever is powerful. They're more powerful together as a result of those things. And so we need to relinquish power as individuals. Like all of us need to relinquish power, control, or even a single decision in order to help someone else feel their own power. And the goal isn't to abdicate your participation in the process. The goal is to allow someone else to feel that action, to move away from nihilism, to feel like they can do something. The next thing, so you've found your give a shit, so you're actively distributing power and letting go of the reins a little bit. The next thing is to begin to aggregate that power, right? To feel as a group we can collectively care about something and do something together to affect change. This is what happened with the Me Too movement. This is what happens with BLM. This is labor organizing. This is even examples that pop into news stories in much smaller groups like the Coinbase defections or any other defections in companies where something goes sideways. For an industry that speaks about collaboration as much as advertising and media and marketing talk about collaboration, this part should be easy. Bring your power together. There's power in numbers. It is a trite idea, but it is also true. And the last thing is to use your power, right? This is the scary step, I guess, right? This is where you're putting like the rubber meets the road, so to speak. You have to be ready to lose at this point, but you can't let it stop you, right? Every instance where you use your power is not going to turn out the way that you want it, right? Every shot doesn't go in, you never bat 1,000, some other sports platitude, but making an improvement in something that you care about is like a glass of water in the desert of nihilism, right? It builds a belief in yourself that you can do something the next time you encounter a situation where you believe a change needs to happen, right? If we look back at a story like the Great Resignation that was talked about in this sort of immensely fearful way within the media and look at it from a different angle, it's a story about a large swath of people taking their own power into their hands, and whether they did it because they were unhappy with a work environment, they wanted more responsibility, they wanted to bet on themselves, they needed to change geography, or just wanted to reevaluate their relationship with their life. They took action, changed jobs, and began to feel their own power for good, bad, or other. And I think that is something that we want to see more of. I mean, ultimately, all of us, but especially those of us in situations where we're already imbued with some sense of power, need to feel like our actions can have an impact, especially as we face all of the things that we talked about through this, ray of sunshine of a talk that I've given. I think a lot of us in this room have the power to make changes and make impact on those things, and the question becomes, do you want to be the French aristocracy of 1788, seeing all of the problems around you and turning to nihilist phrases like "after us the flood"? Or do we want to push back against these nihilist ideas and make changes about things that we care about? This is places you can find me and the company. If you found this interesting, the progress report is a thing our company puts out every 2 weeks. All kinds of people write about it, just finding ways that we can all take action. And I think they're going to put up a Q&A thing. We have a few minutes for Q&A if anyone has any things they want to ask or talk about. But thank you for listening to this. I guess this goes, and I'm going to get fed questions if there are any. Yeah.
Hello. I was just, so I apologize if you already said this because I came in a little bit late, but I was just checking out your website, and I see you have a lot of partner companies, so I was wondering if you could explain in more detail how you partner with them and help them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it happens in many different ways. I mean, often the way the door opens is someone comes to us with a problem and we come and try and solve that in some way. I think the way that I think about it that's different, at least as it relates to this conversation, is that when we started the company, we never wanted to have to walk away from our own values in the context of our work. And what we found is that when you can look at things through this non-zero sum lens, you can find wins that work for the company and help them in whatever sort of business context they're looking at, but can also help the customer in some way improve their life and can take into consideration building social wins. And so we have things that we've done over the years that are sort of more public, that are sort of re-evaluating things and allowing people and sort of constituencies within companies feel better about the rebranding of the WMBA and both the identity and some of the internal structures, I think, are an example of this, where maybe there was contention between all of the different parties involved, and bringing them together, coming up with a resolution, and feeling like they could feel themselves represented in the work is maybe a demonstration of that. I don't know if I answered your question or not. Yeah. Any others? No? All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming.